Okay, so I've started a course that Trae's also going to do, and a third new friend of mine, Mila, and it's called Syntropic Enterprise. And so one of the things that they talk about is a source idea. So I kind of have come across a couple of source ideas, and I feel that yours is one, Michael.
Okay.
About the reverse market mechanics. And I thought it would be quite interesting just to have a conversation about what's the difference between a source idea and a good idea. And then we'll just see where that kind of really takes us after we throw some stuff around. So I'm going to kick off and just kind of present my thoughts on it. I've been in the field of community development and doing projects in disadvantaged areas for a long time. And it's not like the easiest of work to get outcomes with. And what I found was that after when you've been doing something for a number of years, you kind of build up almost like a sixth sense sometimes. And so from experience, from observation, and from kind of thinking things through rationally about, okay, what's not working, what could work, and, you know, what's the first step, those kind of processes. After like a number of years, I began to have a small feeling inside. It's like a seed when I came up with an idea that kind of I felt would work. Because you'd go through lots of different ideas and think, oh, you could do this, you could do this. But then, you know, after a certain amount of experience, you get to recognize something that kind of seems as though it's going to be a good idea, as opposed to let's just try it and keep trying things. And it was it's difficult to explain feelings, isn't it? Especially ones that quite, what's the word, kind of delicate feelings, transient. It was just like a small warm seed, I suppose, but not, it was very kind of, not well formed, kind of a hazy seed. But, you know, I'd get that when I came up with something. And it was something to do with, maybe I could see lots of things. Like what I found was that people very often could see, like if they were good at marketing, they would see how to market something. Or if they were good at strategy, they might kind of see the strategic stuff. And if they were good at like making things or servicing things or whatever it was that they were good at. But there weren't that many people that could kind of say, okay, this is everything we've got. Let's go, what's missing, all of that. So maybe it's something to do with that as well. Because you only get ideas. Like if you're doing the same things that you're good at all the time, you don't necessarily need to come up with an idea. And so that's the where and how my good idea kind of experiences were. And often I would get further in a project than many people I know.
Yes.
And I think it was something to do with, I'm quite happy with lots of different bits of information and where to go with them. And very often, because people didn't have that overall thing, they would either do like one element, like research what was missing, or, you know, do a report or something, and then it would not really get anywhere after that.
Right.
So that's what I'm gonna, so it was a mixture of being rational, observational, a bit of touchy-feely stuff. And that's what is a good idea, but I've not really I don't believe I've had a source idea.
Okay. If I had to ask Parmjit, what would you say is the difference between a good idea and a source idea?
So a source idea from an observational point of view is something that has been, it kind of arrives all together. It's a big lot of information that you've not necessarily thought rationally about, and it seems to have arrived in a package. And it's something that's out of the range of, like, even if you're really clever and rational and you've done a job for ages, you still wouldn't come up with that scope.
Got it.
Really interesting what you're saying, Parmjit. A lot of the work that I do with collaborative innovation or strategy innovation has a process or steps. And one of the things we work with a lot is insights versus concepts. And it's along the way. So you kind of start with this seed that you're talking about, which we would say is like an insight. But the insight came from already a great amount of work that we did, like maybe in a workshop where we're literally shaking perception. We're asking people to imagine things or look 50 or 150 years out. And then after all that work comes to an end, then they start to formulate the insights. Then we create concepts, and then those concepts become feasible projects or programs or however you want to label them. So it's interesting that I was hearing source versus, what was the other word you used? Source ideas versus
A good
just
idea.
good ideas.
yeah, and kind of like the evolution of it. Where does it start? Like with the seed, the insight. And what's interesting, what I've observed is that, and what I'm working on too, is group creativity. So when you bring a group of people like us together, how does that insight or how does that concept now evolve? Because you're looking from one perspective, Parmjit, Mike's looking from another, Nefertiti, Trae from another, and then but when we come together, we start to form a whole picture.
Yeah, there's something about being able to articulate it as well. Somebody else. So you might kind of have an idea of, yeah, this is going to work really well. But if you haven't got the means to put that into words or some kind of concept that other people can get and see the same thing, that can be a barrier.
Yeah, what comes up for me with reflecting on a source idea, is the way you put it, Parmjit. I think of the overview effect from collaborative innovation. It's kind of like looking at it from afar and seeing the whole picture. What comes up for me as well in thinking about maybe good ideas are the process to getting to the source idea. I think of an improv game that I used to play with my kids, and also in groups like this, a game called Chain of Events, where you know the end of the story, you know the beginning of the story, and then everybody else kind of puts in just one part of the story so that there is a process to the end. So so one person would say, once upon a time there was a frog who lived in Candy Mountain. And then at the end, it would be like, and that's when the Yeti discovered his true self. And then we kind of fill it, each person kind of steps in, they'll step in the middle and come up with something completely random for the middle. And then everybody just comes up with the logical steps, the good ideas, to get to the end of the Yeti finally, found himself. So, yeah, so in integrating the parts, I feel like everybody coming up with their good idea can kind of lead to, the source idea is what comes up for me, considering good ideas and source ideas.
So there's something in there about intention maybe as well. It's like, what is the question that you want answered? And you form an intention to get that answered. That's
Absolutely.
the end of your story. So your idea about reverse market mechanics, was that something that came about because of lots of little ideas that you had set a question? So you collected lots of little ideas, some of which were yours and some of which were from outside, from other people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was
like
a process.
Kind of a bridge. The sort of idea.
Yeah, a lot of that was from working as, in an investment company and understanding all of the little pieces, all of the emotions, all of the factors like media and competitiveness and cooperation, how that kind of formed an extractive economy, and how a lot of reverse market mechanics came up with how do we interrupt some of these dysfunctional relationships? How do we interrupt this overriding sense of competition, change the nature of the relationship so that we can make the math, the numbers work for us, rather than having to constantly, fight a battle that, someone else is also fighting. It's kind of like, where do we, how do we change the nature of those little pieces, the companies, the individual's need for, for achievement. How do we just change those little relationships so that we can change the macrocosm from extractive to regenerative, from competitive to cooperative?
Okay, so there's lots of rational thinking involved in there.
Yeah.
So you set a question. It was something about the context you were in, so you knew the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah. Worked with I worked with brokers every day. I worked with entrepreneurs every day. I worked with people who valued competition over cooperation, and I saw how patient strategy and cooperation, led to a positive outcome in the long run. But competitiveness and an overriding of emotions, dysfunction within these hierarchical systems, usually led to, a negative outcome, usually led to, a destructive outcome. And and being in that environment, really seeing how that competitiveness just translated into the way people treated each other at the workplace, just got me thinking about, just the mechanics of the numbers, the mechanics of how, this whole ecosystem, how this whole ecosystem just thrives on dysfunction. And I thought there was just ways that you can make it a cooperative system and kind of decentralize all of that. So, yeah.
Where would you say you are on your journey now from the idea, and whether it's evolved or changed?
It's changed in the sense that I'm at the point where I'm laying the most important foundation, where the relationship has to be first. That's why we meet every 2 weeks. The fellowship, if that's not there, the mechanics, the numbers, all of it, it means nothing. It really means nothing unless there's that foundation of mutuality, of everybody kind of taking ownership and bringing their life to, to this fellowship, to the organism.
And so, how will you know once we've got to a stage where, we've got the kind of structure and everything else, that it's still the source idea that you had?
How will I know it's still the source idea?
Would you say it's a source idea, or would you say it's a good idea that you had?
Reverse market mechanics, is that what you're asking me about? If it's a source idea or if it's I think it's a source idea because the way I interpret it, the way I see it, it's imitating nature. It's imitating a natural process. So I don't really think of it so much as my idea. I think of it in terms of when there is a cooperation, when there is a flow, when there is a sense of mutuality, it leads to exponential growth. We can see that, in the human population. We can see that, we can see that in nature. So I think it's nature's good idea. I think it's the universe's good idea. And my process is just kind of submitting to that and discovering, when people come together and they really explore and they support each other through understanding, the negative emotions, the challenging emotions, and help bring each other up through that. I honestly believe that the ability to attract new experiences, to attract more positive experiences, is natural. And you don't necessarily have to fight for it. You might have to fight yourself for that for a little bit. But I feel it's a source idea in the sense that we're never meant to do anything alone. Like in the play that Nefertiti and I perform in, there's this beautiful line from the higher power that says, there are 8 billion people in this world. You're never meant to do anything alone. And to me, the source idea of reverse market mechanics affecting the economy, the global ecosystem, is really just a matter of submitting to those relationships that just feel natural and just feel, that feel that you're really growing and you're getting something from it, you're giving something. And there's that sense of mutuality. I feel like competitiveness, this toxic patriarchal system, wants us to believe we're alone. And I was taught to believe that a cell that consciously thinks it's alone becomes cancerous. So it's kind of like looking at it from that perspective of nature as well too. I feel like I'm submitting to the natural process of healing the disease. So in that sense, I feel it is a source idea.
But you didn't get it all in one go. It was built up over decades. That's
built up
interesting.
over a lot of experiences as both working as an investment manager, working as a drama teacher, a life coach, a personal trainer, a producer, a television producer. That's how I met Marta. And just kind of integrating all of those roles into just what worked personally for me. So it was, it's a 45-year process and still going.
But was there a time? Was there a time when something formed, like a seed or something or a feeling, and you thought, it's this? Or was it so kind of gradual that it just is there?
It's still a process, Parmjit, honestly. It's still a process. It's still a process. When I first met Marta, and we were producing for New Century Television, I first came across, this business model that emphasized the interpersonal relationships, really deepening the relationships. They were still selling products. They were still, in my mind, they were still exploiting natural resources. So I kind of really resonated with the business plan, even though I didn't necessarily resonate with the ethics. And I shared some of that with Marta back at the time. And that's really kind of where the idea of 2x2 came. And I'm thinking to myself, this is applicable to, to relationships. This is applicable to helping people find what they're passionate about and sharing that with people that they're passionate about sharing it with. So then I started to recognize, I recognize some of the extractive or exploitative qualities of the economy, of the stock market. And that's where it just dawned on me that, well, wait a minute, if you take the emphasis off of competition, you reverse some of the factors, such as volume and price of a share of stock, you know, open up a cooperative business and you just reverse some of those factors, you've got an expansive economy that shares equally based on the time you invest in it. So that started to evolve into that as well.
That was the moment that there was like what I'm calling like some kind of a seed, even though it was not quite formed.
Yeah, that probably would have been the seed. And that was when I wrote the stock book, where I started really. I was working at Nutrisystem. At that time, there was a lot of downtime at my desk. And that's when I started just writing out, these ideas about, well, wait a minute, what if you just change the factors, within the variables of how to redistribute income from stock ownership. And, I started writing, I wrote the first copy of the business plan back then. That was the seed. And then it evolved into time banking. So,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Because the other thing I noticed was that the emotion behind it, the passion behind it, which isn't always a good thing, because sometimes people come up with an idea that is not very broad, and it's like it's my idea and it's the only one that's, that kind of a thing. But then there's another kind of passion, which is I feel the truth in it. Nefertiti, you haven't said anything.
I am absolutely amazed. This is excellent stuff. And I was actually thinking about the regenerative economy and the extractive economy, and how responsibility has been coming up so frequently for me since we did our clearing last year, and going over what has happened in our lives, what has happened in my life, how have I benefit? How have I left things on the table and not gone back to them? What do I have the ability to respond to today? And all this source and resourcing source, because we all have the space and time to sit and ponder and question and imagine. And then that feeling piece too, Parmjit, I can so relate to how our emotions can either overwhelm us or allow us to ride to the occasion where we can be okay with what is happening as it's happening. I've been learning so much from this fellowship.
And you know what you just made me think? I'd never made the connection between resource and source.
Yes. Weaving together, resourcing source. I just realized that individually, I have felt incapable of making certain choices for whatever reason, which ties into the production, that Mike and I are involved in, where we question a person's choice. Like, do you really believe you have a choice? And what is my responsibility? What is my burden? And that's something I've been sharing when we did our check-in earlier about how I realized I may have overburdened myself and or others. Was it intentional? But the lessons was there. And the piece of wanting for myself as much as I want for my fellow humans, like that mutuality, that the compassion, I believe it's a definite oneness concept. And for those who have difficulty with the relinquishing of mine, it's my idea. Like, I thought of it, like, I've had conversations quite recently with people who are just scared to come forward with their perhaps a source idea because they don't want it to be taken away. So really that comes back to me, reminding me of trust and trusting, and then we create safe spaces here for people to feel able to open up and share. And then we get a bunch of good ideas and they all get sourced together. And yes.
And there's something that you've mentioned about responsibility, because in the paradigm that we're in, when I was working for the city council, the responsibility was for the manager to make sure that all of us had our heads down and we were doing whatever it was, like rubber stamping things and, you know, writing reports. Like it was about making sure you got the hours in, doing whatever it was. And, you know, lots of burnout in that whole culture of really working hard if you're a responsible person and working overtime and all of this. But it's like, exactly what's the purpose of it? Where is it going?
It's shifted today.
Yeah.
The responsibility is in the relationship building. And as I come here and learned how to be in relationship with others, that brings it home to me, because then I have to clarify, well, why did I feel that way when they spoke? Or why did I feel that way when, you know, this was shared? Or how come this conversation, I don't get along with these people, but I get along really great with these people? Like there's all these questions that come up, you know? And so it's like really interesting to put the different pieces together and all have that space where we can come together and receive, you know, the safety to continue to build and grow, you know, in spite of any, and along with all that we learn about ourselves and others, because there's a lot of different perspectives out there and they all come from some sort of reason. Like I think what Mike shared about the game that they play, the drama, like there's a beginning and an end. And then the middle part is kind of like where we all have our own little perspective. So it's like, oh, well, what does your middle look like? It's like we're all Oreo cookies, but the middle is a different flavor. I don't know. So.
Yeah. So maybe the first order responsibility is about the response part of it.
I tend to feel like when I try to have a response, to breathe through it. My breath helps me a lot. And just having that, since I've experienced safe spaces with people, if I'm in a situation or a conversation with somebody and I'm not feeling too safe, I try to breathe through that and then just, you know, checking with myself. You know, it doesn't always happen, but that's my desire. And I, you know, try to continue to work through that. So.
But you see, if you're a manager or a boss, you can override that, can't you? By saying, I'm the manager, do it now.
Yes, that's a possibility. I guess all is possible, but then I guess the kickback comes in when the relationship is more catered to, you know, because there must be a reason why the resistance is occurring in the first place. Why do I have to, as a boss, say to do it now if that person who's employed is not very excited to be doing it? So there's a conversation we can have and maybe clear that air. All equal, right? Because it's like, how would I behave if I believe that I am an equal partner to you? You know, would I have to come and say that? You know, it's like redefining the entire structure and system altogether. And
I had a dream. I shot my sister-in-law. Trae's heard some of my weird dreams. I shot my sister-in-law. We were upstairs and we were talking, and then she said something and I disagreed with it. And then instead of like thinking, okay, all of those things that you're saying, I had all these henchmen around me and I just went like that, and they knew what I meant, and, you know, she would be disposed of without any fuss.
That's one way to do it as well. There's numerous ways of
But
doing
it was a really shocking dream.
Yes.
And then I had to go downstairs and then mingle with family and mingle with my niece. And I was thinking, oh, I hope she doesn't find out what I've just done. But the point of it was, I think that was, for me, that was like a taste.
Of that power.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how it makes you like shun any sense of responsibility, because it's just so easy.
The easy piece of the snap, I feel, comes with, with great responsibility. There's a saying, I don't know the rest of it. With more responsibility comes more something else. But I feel like when we sleep at night or when we're in silence, like all the choices we make are reflected to us. So that snap is not as easy as I feel it really appears to be. I think every decision's more weighted than we tend to give it credit for, because even every moment we're here is amazing. It's definitely not a guarantee. It's definitely a present. And I think that awareness is, sometimes often lost. So that is power in and of itself. So.
Yeah. Wow. That's gone to places I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Trae, have you got any responses? You've been sitting very quietly.
I have many. First of all, I just want to offer up my sincere gratitude for your brain, Parmjit. The way you ask questions has me glued. Like, it literally, you come up with another question, I'm like, oh, this is a good question. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, it's like candy for me. And I really want to offer up that so much of our society has lost the art of inquiry. Okay, like, we have this sense that we'll ask a question and then we'll get an answer and then the conversation is done. There's an art to ongoing inquiry, and you do that, you embody that. It's just a natural way of being for you. And I know that you've complained on occasion that it's pissed people off, but I, for one, enjoy it. So I want to just offer that up, just as a gratitude before I comment further. So wow, there's so much here. I'm where to start. So the reason that I had suggested the Centropic Enterprise course, the masterclass, was because in 20 years or so, and it was interesting you sharing sort of a bit of your path, Michael. And I'm not, do you prefer Mike or Michael? I just want to make sure that I'm honoring your name.
Mike is fine.
Mike.
Yeah.
Okay. So, when you talked about theater, all the backgrounds, I'm like, okay, tick, 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 tick. We come from similar cloth, you and I, in a lot of respects. Anyhow, the reason that I offered it up is that about, in over 25 years of holding what I would call a source intention, and I want to sort of differentiate that shortly. I feel that it's like radar, right? And there's a saying that, the universe will only give you what it can give you when you're ready to receive it. right? Like if the universe had given me everything all at once, you talked about it sort of arriving in a package, I think it would have scared the living bejeebers out of me. Like completely honestly, I would not have been prepared, readied in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, even if you'd have told me 5 years ago or 6 years ago that certain things would occur in my life that have happened in the last 5 years, I probably would have laughed my face off and said there was not a chance in hell that any of it was ever going to happen. So I question this arriving in a package thing. Anyhow, going back to Christine, when I saw the initial videos of what Christine was teaching, my radar went that. Not that that is perfect, not that that is necessarily an it. We have this sense of whether something is it or not. There's not an it, but it's close enough and nobody else is teaching it, that's where we, that's where the invitation, because there's an invitation to it, that's where the invitation becomes a pull that you just can't deny. And it's like, sometimes you don't even understand it. It's like the radar is up, the invitation shows up, you feel the pull, you go to the pull, and sometimes you don't even understand why you were pulled where you were pulled until a month or years later. And in that instance, in every one of those experiences then weave, the weaving starts happening, and there's this tapestry that starts to emerge that is just awe-inspiring, because there's a sense that I'm not controlling it. And I love what Christine teaches, and I know that this idea of a source idea came from Christine. I question, and it's not my, like I said, everything's an evolution, and even Christine will tell you that the way she's landing it and the way she's languaging it is in constant evolution. Ideas, by and large, I think we need to dismantle, and this comes from sort of the brain science and our associations. And, Michael knows a little bit now of sort of the work that I've been doing around brain science and the distinction between concentration, meditation, and contemplation, and how our brain works to learn. But the whole idea of an idea, if I may use the word in the description, actually separates. Okay, an idea actually separates. And there is that sense of separateness and aloneness to it. And I think that's where you're catching the hiccup, right? Which is, I would prefer to call it a source intention versus a good idea. If we were to have that conversation, I think that then the qualities or the conditions that then support those languagings or those wordings would then allow us to engage in a much different kind of a discussion, rather than a cleaving between what do we mean between source and good, and keeping idea as the constant. So not to say that there's a wrong or a right, but that perhaps those distinctions might help the conversation further.
Yeah.
You had asked me in the last call that we were in what I thought the difference was, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm gonna need to perk on this one. I don't think I can come back, and not that I'm to come back with an answer. I never believe that I have an answer for anything. When I think I do, I'm inevitably only have a tiny piece of the puzzle, if a piece of the puzzle at all. But there were so many things that you touched on that I'm just going to offer some just snippets of in no particular order. And you talked about the outcomes and solutions and how we're sort of oriented, and we're taught to problem solve. Okay. Our orientation is around problem solution, question answer. Are any of you familiar with Dave Snowden? Dave Snowden's work. Okay, so Dave Snowden used to work for IBM, and he now has a nonprofit called Cognitive Edge. And Dave Snowden talks about complexity, the realm of complexity. And there's a really beautiful video on YouTube. It's about a 10-minute video. It's super short. And he talks about the different quadrants. There's the simple quadrant, the complicated quadrant, the complex quadrant, and then the chaotic quadrant. And each of those 4 quadrants have different problems, if you will, different issues, and they require very distinctly different ways of problem solving. Okay, and our challenge is that we tend to want to problem solve with simple and complicated ways of doing it, because that's where most of our education has landed, is in the simple and the complicated environments. We're going to try to make the complicated simple, and we're going to try to solve the problem in that manner. All right. Now, the chaotic realm is where there's been a lot of things drawn actually from improv, from a variety of different sources. They talk about the chaotic environment. Chaotic meaning the order of chaos, and how that actually, and that's where you get agile from, that's where you get scrum from in the tech realm, that's where you get all that sort of, we're going to play, we're going to, see what sticks to the wall, and we're going to go from there. The complex environment is emergent. You cannot problem solve in it. You cannot singularly come to a solution. It must be collective, and it must be emergent. And we are, even though we are naturally wired to play in that arena, it's sort of been educated out of us, and we need to sort of get back to those roots of what's natural. And again, I think if we were to reflect or contemplate on just that structure in the context of this conversation, we would be having very different insights coming out in terms of what is it that we're actually distinguishing, and how are we proceeding forward. And so I had way more notes, but when it comes to sort of my tendency is to love the question, embrace the question, dismantle the question, pull back the assumptions on the question before even venturing further on what the possibilities might be. And
the question circle.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I'm loving this, and I'm just really, really grateful to be.
We